Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Rochester. For more than 150 years, ours has been a congregation of open minds and loving hearts, celebrating many sources of wisdom and many spiritual paths. Your faith, your doubts, your questions, your hopes for our world are welcome here. And our doors are closed because our hearts are open, living our values of care and compassion. We invite you to stay connected with us online through various small groups and classes, Wednesday night forums, Sunday coffee hour. There are also spirit kits available for families and children that you can pick up monthly here at the church, a little drive-through pickup with themed activities, a variety of ways to stay connected. And if you're a newcomer, if you've been visiting our church during this time of online church, you can find out more. There's an online visitor form on our website, or contact our staff if you'd like to get connected during this time, learn more about our church and upcoming newcomer classes. This Wednesday night, our forum is session 2 of Practicing Justice, highlighting justice and service work within and beyond the congregation from members who have been doing that work for years. So we invite you to come this Wednesday night to hear about not only what's been happening over years in this church, but also what's going on right now in this time of distancing, as well as to imagine what might come for our justice work in days and months and years to come. So join us 6:30 this Wednesday night for that forum. And this afternoon at 2 o'clock is the Isaiah Interfaith Forum, which is a statewide interfaith justice organization that I'll be participating in, and there'll be special guests from across the state, including Governor Walz and Speaker of the Minnesota House Hortman, and other interfaith and community leaders. You can still register if you go to the weekly e-news. There's a registration link to find more information to get connected, to hear about how to bring faith values of inclusion and justice to the political conversation in Minnesota in this session and these coming months. So join us this afternoon at 2 o'clock for that special forum. And today's offering will go to support the mission and vision of this church, including half for our Human Needs Fund, which offers emergency financial assistance to members and friends. You can give at uurochmn.org/give. Thank you for your generosity. And finally, as we gather, we invite you to take a deep breath, center down wherever you are, and hear these words from the Reverend Eliza Tupper Wilkes, minister of this church in the 1870s. May our faith in humanity and our message of hope and good cheer light our way. It's good to be together.
This is the Unitarian Universalist Church. This is the church of the Flaming Chalice. This is the church of the open mind. This is the church of the loving heart, where friends come together and share.
Good morning. I am recording this the day after the inauguration of President Biden and Vice President Harris. I spent much of yesterday in tears, as I understand many of my friends did also. What I had not realized was the physical burden of tension I had been carrying for the last 4 years, waiting for the other shoe to drop every single day. In his inaugural address, President Biden said, "We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts. If we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes. As my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes." This hardening of our hearts was an insidious change, encouraged by the behaviors and speech we saw and heard every day, so that it became what was expected, the norm. Unhappily, I have to admit that my speech has coarsened during the last 4 years, perhaps not always in public, but certainly in private. We become what we see and hear every day, much as we come to believe in the same way. Even with as hard as I have personally worked to not let the lack of integrity and decency that has been our national role model affect my behavior and physical being, it has. It was unconscious but real change. A quotation from my Zen calendar this last week keeps running through my mind. "There is a crack in everything God has made." Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote these words. I do not know the context, and context is everything. I keep thinking about what comes through that crack. I believe that it is in our control to determine whether it is light or dark, civil or uncivil. As we move forward, I would like us to be careful of our language. In the Principle 4 discussion group, we talk about hot button words for UUs in order to bring those words out of their caves in which they reside and into the light of reason and understanding to allow them to be welcome in our lives as Unitarian Universalists. I believe the same thing needs to happen in the national conversation. Let us not use words as unthinking ammunition against those with whom we think we disagree. Let us have conversations, make connections, and get to know each other. There are many conversations to be had, not all of them comfortable, and certainly not all of them will end well, depending on your point of view. But as we go forward this year, when most of our talking is on Zoom, Facebook, and other social media, let us be careful with others. We all need gentle, kind, human connection to get through these difficult days. Let me finish with another quotation from my Zen calendar, this time by Mark Nepo from Inauguration Day. "Whether through the patterns left in snow or geese honking in the dark, or through the brilliant wet leaf that hits your face the moment you are questioning your worth, the quiet teachers are everywhere, pointing us to the unloved portion of our lives. When we think we are in charge, the lessons dissolve as accidents or coincidence. But when we're humble enough to welcome the connections, the glass that breaks across the room is offering us direction, giving us a clue to the story we are in."
just get stuck? I mean, stuck thinking of the next thing you want to write or read or draw or create or do. Just what are you going to do next? Sometimes figuring that out is as easy as asking, well, what if? And imagining the possibilities. What If? Written by Samantha Berger, illustrated by Mark Corrado. With a pencil and paper, I write and draw art to create many stories that come from my heart. But what if that pencil one day disappeared? Well, I'd fold up the paper till stories appeared. And what if that paper was no longer there? I'd chisel the table and then carve the chair. And what if there wasn't a chair here at all? I'd chip and I'd peel at the paint on the wall. And what if there wasn't a wall anymore? I might build a story from boards in the floor. Without any floor, I could still use the land and sketch out a tale in the dirt with my hand. I could still shape the leaves. I could still sculpt the snow. I could still plant the flowers and make kingdoms grow. Without any land, well, I would still use the light, invent shadow stories the sun would ignite. If there was no light, I would still use my voice to sing out my stories, to chant and rejoice. I'd still have my body to twist and to bend, to dance out my stories beginning to end. If I had nothing, but still had my mind, there'd always be stories to seek and to find. If I know nothing but one bit of fate, as long as I live, I will always create. As long as I live, I will always create. I really like this story because it reminds me that we're always learning new things, that taking things to the next level is often right within our reach. We just need to imagine what that could be and work our way toward it. And sometimes that imagination brings us new things we never thought we would ever do.
morning. It is good to be with you, coming from the beautiful Gulf shores of Orange Beach, Alabama. I hoped to send you sunshine this morning, but the weather didn't get that memo. But let the sound of the waves bring us together this morning. We are still physically separated, but seeing a light in the future as we look forward to being together again. For now, we continue to gather in this virtual way as we create a place of communal caring and connection. Be enriched by the virtual presence of each other and draw yourself closer into the heart of love at this time of service and reflection. In this time together, we ask that our minds be open, our hearts welcoming, our arms embracing. Here, we honor all who support us in this caring, loving, and all-inclusive ministry. We send gratitude to Shana Johnson, serving as our caring coordinator, arranging care for our members and friends in need. The members of our caring committee are wonderful examples of our compassionate community, holding us up as we go through challenging and happy times. During this time of increasing needs in our lives and community, we encourage you to reach out for support and help if you are experiencing challenges. Many of us may need additional care, whether it be personal, pastoral care, grocery delivery, or an errand run, and we encourage you to reach out to Reverend Luke or myself with that request. We thank all of you who have served our congregation in this way over the last few months. In this community, we make time each week to share pieces of our lives with one another. We do this because each person here has value. Each person's experience matters. We lift up those whose lives are touched by sadness, by illness, by worry, or by loneliness. We revel in those who are celebrating joy in their lives. May their happiness lift us all. May all of us find comfort, hope, joy, and healing strength in this community. We hold Debbie Neville and her family in our hearts as they hold vigil for her sister Judy Keene, as they prepare to say goodbye to her after a difficult 2-year health struggle. They are grateful that she is here in Rochester and for being able to visit her. At this time of deep sadness and heartache, please keep them close. And our hearts are with Carolyn White this morning. Her mother, Evelyn Ruth White, age 97, passed away on January 17th after a fall and broken hip. With help from hospice, they were able to take care of her at home where she wanted to be. She had been in so much pain these last years, and it was a peaceful and content passing. We celebrate her life and the fact that Carolyn could be with her and hold the family in our hearts. In this new year, we continue to focus on reaching out to all of those around us, letting them know that we are still here, holding and supporting them as we continue to face challenges in our community and country. Cards and phone calls can help lift those you love, and we encourage you to support our community and local businesses as they reopen. May the faith in the spirit of life, love for the community of Earth, and love for the light in each other be ours now and in all the days to come.
I invite you to take a deep breath. Breathe deep the breath of life. Breathe deeply here in this house of love and justice, hope and grace. Know that here you are named and you are known as beloved, as sacred, as welcome. I invite you into this time of meditation, this time of prayer, first by sharing silence together. Spirit of life and love, God of 1,000 names and beyond all naming, may we feel beneath us the earth and its ancient turning, feel above us the sky and its ancient stars holding us with their light. In these fragile days, in what feels like a fragile country and world. Help us remember what holds us together. We know it is the small things in between, the brief moments of rest and breath, each mindful stitch of the needle or stroke of the brush, each note of the song that carries it forward, holds it together. It is the simple, small, kind word or act. It is the gift of feeling the sun on your skin or hearing the bird or the joy of a child sledding down a hill. Whatever it is, give us the heart to pay attention to the small moments that hold our broken open hearts together. We hold in our hearts this day all those who suffer in mind, in body, or spirit. I invite you to bring the names you're holding in your own heart this day in joy or in sorrow, celebration or concern, and silently or aloud now in this time to speak their names. For all those names and many others, may we be forever grateful for the fabric of love and of life that weaves us together. May those threads hold us in love and in strength. These words are from an excerpt from The Hill We Climb by poet Amanda Gorman, first Youth Poet Laureate, and the poet speaking this week to a tender nation at the presidential inauguration. If you were able to hear and see her as she spoke, I invite you to bring to mind her voice and image offering these words. Bring it back from your memory. And if you haven't watched it or been able to hear it, I invite you to find it online and hear not my rendering of it, but hers. In part, she shared these words. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just is always isn't justice. And yet the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine. But that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters. We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce, and free. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Amen.
The first reading is Remember the Future by the Reverend Teresa Soto. Can we develop the skill of remembering the future? Can we commit to build the community that will extend into a time that we only know by memory because it will outlast us? Memorize the compass points of the day yet to come. The truth, the love, the fire, the endless yes of the horizon. Shake the scales of your imagination. Reach, stretch, rise. There is no more time for pretending that everything can be all right without your care, without your attention. You can mourn grief being more real at times than the promise of the sunrise, more real than the peace of the moon that by inconstant silver turns, disappears. And yet, while we may mourn changes, losses, deceptions, and betrayals, beneath the ash we find the ember. We weep, and then, as we have learned from labor movements, we organize. Remember the day toward which we gather, the tomorrow toward which we advance. It is with your actions today that you engage that muscle memory, that sense of smell, the ragged velvet feel of a day that you have never lived. It is also your day. Remember it well. The second reading is On Paper by Jacqueline Woodson. The first time I write my full name, Jacqueline Amanda Woodson, without anybody's help on a clean white page in my composition notebook, I know if I wanted to, I could write anything. Letters becoming words, words gathering meaning, becoming thoughts outside my head, becoming sentences written by Jacqueline Amanda Woodson.
I don't know, she said. That's what the recipe called for. This is a person calling into a radio show over the holidays, speaking about family traditions and mysteries. Preparing a brisket for Hanukkah, she shared the story of going to the butcher and asking him to cut the ends short. And the butcher just simply asked, "Okay, but why?" She responded, I don't know, it's what the recipe calls for. And the butcher responded, "I'm glad to do it, but I wonder, is this a family recipe?" "Yes," she replied, "like passed down from generations?" The butcher asked. "Yeah," she said. He said, "You know, assuming it's from maybe your grandparents or even before their generation, there was a standard style of pan that was made that didn't fit the usual size of the brisket, so that's why they said to cut it, not because you had to, but because it wouldn't fit in the pan." She never realized and said, "Oh, I thought that's just what had to be done. That's what the recipe called for," she said. How many times on any given day, in known and unknown ways all the time, do we attend to our lives in such a way, sometimes uncritical or rote, or simply because the recipe, the way we've always done it, called for it, is so routine that we hardly notice or question or wonder about whatever it is we're thinking or doing. The way we've always done it. A phrase that we know doesn't take too long to remind us that it's been detrimental throughout history to think that way, justifying horrific things, inhumane oppression and separation, slavery, subjugation, oppression based on race, class, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, but these large overarching injustices actually take place in daily moments, all the time. They can feel distant when we think about the large-scale things, but really they're present in people's daily lives, the way we've always done it. It has to do with narratives that we push about gender in this culture, about what boys or girls ought to do or be, or how we use pronouns and identify people, which we'll discuss more in depth next week. The way we've always done it has to do with our assumptions around what people have access to or what they can or can't afford. About when we use the word we, who do we mean? If anything, this last almost year now of world flipped in so many ways has forced us to examine how we've always done things. In our social structures, what safety nets are we providing? What health practices probably should be much more standard every year, every season, to protect the vulnerable? We've been wondering in our justice work about our assumptions of what public safety really looks like and how it's implemented, and the continued systemic racism and classism embedded in our criminal justice system, in healthcare, in education, in everything. We know that it took massive patience and organizing and will, as well as imagination of things that had never existed, for the movements to make progress toward a world that gets incrementally a little better here and there. People had to imagine that women would be able to gain the right to vote, that Jim Crow was certainly separate and certainly not equal, that people should be able to marry or love or be with without fear whoever they loved, or use whatever restroom they needed to. People had to imagine new ways of doing, and we're still imagining that and working on it and trying to protect those things we've gained and are still trying to gain. This past year has forced us to examine our daily lives, the tiny little things like where to set up a desk at home or create spaces for distance learning, or how to get groceries or medicine or essential care safely, how to stay connected with people, how to navigate one's own privilege or protection with the call to love your neighbor, how to survive for some through distance, through connection, through the social chasm of experience right now, of how differently we experience the world, how we always have, and how we really are now. This has been a year of not how we've always done it, for sure. There are moments, maybe in the quiet moments midday, after watching whatever's on the news this week, or at the end of the day as the sun sets early, even as the light grows, or at the break of day wondering what's going to come today. There are moments, perhaps, at least for me, maybe for you, where you think back and wonder, how did we get here? I couldn't have imagined where we are now. Maybe we couldn't imagine the relief we might have felt this week for our country with just a few words of decency and bright, shining words and images, a new imagining of what a vice president could look like and be, or how a poet's words can soothe a country way better than any preacher in this pulpit after 4 years of tension built up, like Anne spoke about, of what could feel at times like tyranny or terror at any moment from the seat of power. Sometimes those sentiments of surprise of where we've come to can be because of a lack of critical thinking, kind of like, really? We couldn't see that coming? We're missing the signs of a decaying democracy or unattended dissonance in our social fabric. And other times it's because of our inability or questioning our ability to be able to adapt quickly. We assume change is always slow. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes it's painfully slow. Sometimes it's at an evolutionary speed, or as I grew up learning in my family a description of what church time was compared to regular time, church time was as slow as cold molasses. Perhaps when we think retrospectively this year of how we've changed, how we've rearranged everything around us these months, living rooms, our daily lives, our aching and anxious souls, perhaps looking at how quickly things have changed over these months in ways we couldn't imagine last year, let alone last month, last week. Perhaps we can imagine our future that way too. In what the Reverend Teresa Soto invites us to, the ability to remember the future. Sometimes hard to get your mind around that. But to engage the muscle memory of a day you've never lived. To begin to attune your body, heart, mind towards what hasn't been yet. Because we have to move beyond what just is to justice, writes the poet. That the way things are, without question, is not actually how it's always been or needs to be. As poet of our nation this week, Amanda Gorman spoke, we've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice, and yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Or as poet Jacqueline Woodson writes, on a clean white page in my composition notebook, I know if I wanted to, I could write anything. Letters becoming words, words gathering meaning. What is it when you imagine our future and realize always has not always been that way, actually, or needs to be? What is it that you imagine about our world, about your family, about this church? What is it that we might be able to begin to write? First in our heart's imagination, what words, what dreams, what possibilities are gathering meaning in your heart these days about the unfolding and unknown days and weeks and months to come, sometimes feeling painfully slow? What questions are you asking about your own history or story, of what you thought was certain that has broken open? What is it breaking open to? What can you imagine now that you couldn't imagine before, for good or ill? And how does that hopefully break open your heart for more room for compassion and more discernment for what you're called to next? Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken but simply unfinished, writes the poet. And I think too, somehow we've weathered and witnessed our own soul that isn't broken but simply unfinished, not broken. Sometimes we feel broken. And it's hard to imagine what comes next, hard to imagine a way forward, hard to imagine remaking a new daily routine, rearranging the living room, let alone the world. But the thing is, we know the world only changes when enough people are willing to start small, changing their routine ways of doing and thinking, to wonder about why they do, why they think what they think, and what might need changing in our own hearts and minds, to be open enough to change something small and build on it. I like to think of these little changes in our lives as practicing for the big important changes. Adjusting your schedule for the 10,000th time, or your daily routine, having a cup of tea instead of a cup of coffee, really living on the edge. Trying something new, something different, as small as it may seem, which is not the easiest thing for me, maybe not for you. But I like to think of those tiny little changes as practicing for the big changes. That those little changes. The ability to adapt and change builds over time, like strength training for the soul, working on the muscle memory of imagination to create new pathways of thinking and doing, to keep opening wider and wider still in mind and heart. So instead of stagnation and doing the same thing all the time, we're in training for possibility. We're always in training for possibility. And I am preaching right to myself. Not broken, just unfinished. Just because the pan used to be that size doesn't mean it is now, and doesn't mean things have to be cut that way. Just because a recipe calls for it, just because the story was written that way, just because your heart, your soul, your mind has been told or made to believe this was the only way, over and over again drilled into our minds of what an office holder needed to look like. That this was the only outcome, the only compromise, that whatever it was has confined our imaginations, our identities, our world time and time again. And yet the poet says, the ember stays lit under the ash, says the Reverend Teresa Soto. The embers stay lit under all that ash. And if enough of those embers remember their power, retain their heat, know who they are, remember that their day is still unfolding, then together, unbroken, unfinished, we remember the resilience of ancestors living within us and living in the unknown future, descendants of who yet might be. I believe that the embers still find their way, and together we gather warmth and light and strength, and together we shine. Go yonder, and gather the people. Give them not hell, but courage and hope. Give them something of the love you have found here, and tell all the people that love is our hope.